All right, so a couple things. If you guys want the PowerPoint slides sent to you, I have a pad up here. You can just write your email and I will shoot it out to anybody. If the file is too large, I'll just convert it to a PDF and send it to anybody that wants it. The other thing was when I was walking around the vendor booths, I noticed that there are a couple vendors that you guys, if you're interested in doing this, you might want to stop and talk to. One is called Verstill, and they have some technology where they can produce spirits very quickly. So they have a couple patents out there that are on it, and they produce it faster than most other places in a unique technology. There's also a company that will sell you neutral spirits if you want to buy them because you're going to make products, but you're not going to do full distilling. A lot of people do that for the ready-to-drink type stuff. So, I just want to put a shout out if there's some vendors here that could help you if you're interested in this. All right. So today my goal is to answer some basic questions, things that I answer all the time for people that are interested in doing this. We're not going to get too deep into all the legal stuff, more on the practical, what you can and can't do with it. So the agenda, what I'm going to try to cover today is why you might want to add a distillery, some differences in operations between brewery and distillery that you should be aware of if you're thinking of doing this, locating the distillery operation, how to choose what state license you might want to go for, the difference between a distiller and a rectifier. I get that question quite a bit. Answering a few questions about operations, limitations, some of the differences of what you can do with the different licenses. Food requirements when selling by the glass at the distillery tap room. Sales and distribution of liquor. Internet or DTC, direct-to-consumer sales, obviously that's rather new. It's only in about the past few months even that we could do that. Distilleries could only sell, farm distilleries, which most of you would be doing, could only sell if you showed up at the place. Even if you showed up, they couldn't even ship it to you, but they just changed that recently. So that adds a whole new, great revenue stream for people here in New York. We're going to talk a little bit about contract manufacturing, and a little bit about DSP and general premise. And to be honest, the big thing here is just so you're familiar with the words. So if you go online and try to do some research, you know what those words mean. And then what do you need if you're going to go online and do a TTB application to add distilling to your brewery? I talk a little bit about what it is you're going to need to have with you to put the application together. Distillery licensing at the TTB is not tremendously different than what you apply for with your brewery, but they ask different questions and much more detailed information is needed about certain things. All right. So I assume everybody is here today because you're thinking about or toying with the idea of adding distilling to your brewery operation. So people ask me, why would I consider doing this? You're trying to figure out, does this make any sense for me? So let's talk about some of the reasons that I've seen breweries add distillery operations to them. So the first one is I think a lot of us have heard at this conference today that craft beer is maturing the market. Competition's at an all-time high. So certainly anything that you can do to add extra revenue streams is going to help with stability. It's going to help with your long-term growth. You need new ideas. You have a lot of things you've been doing for a long time. You need new excitement. What they talked about delighting your customer. Sometimes we need to reinvent, do something a little different and something a little new. Another thing, you can take advantage of some of the new big industry trends in, especially RTD canned products. You guys already know how to can products. A lot of people don't. You have the facilities to do it. And this is one of the larger growing segments. In fact, it's one of the only growing segments from the data that I see with it. And I've heard a lot talked about the younger generation. I think a lot of people like RTD because it's easy, but also realize a lot of retailers like it. I have a lot of my licensees that the only thing they serve with their spirits are RTD stuff. They don't want to hire a bartender, but they want to be able to offer these things. So I have places like golf courses, movie theaters. A lot of people that are retailers only want RTD because they don't want to have a full bar and they don't want to hire a bartender. So that is a new trend that you guys might be able to take advantage of. There are higher profit margins on spirits. so that may help a little bit. It's an opportunity to distinguish yourself from other local competitors. There's a lot of breweries around, and if you want to, be something a little bit different, delight your customers, they, said in the keynote address, this is something that you can do to kind of refresh what you're doing. A little bit of new branding, a little bit of new stuff to put on your menu, maybe some new events. All of those things are great right now when businesses are struggling. Product diversification. Obviously, you guys make beer. Some make, the malt beverages with the flavors. Some do the seltzers. But this would allow you to expand even more. Obviously, regular spirits. The ready-to-drink cocktails. You can do alcohol-infused foods. You can do some of the mixers that are out there, that have alcohol. Some of them have low alcohol, and you add something with them. They also, I've seen, I'm not sure all of how you'd get into it, but they have like those Bartesian, it's like a Keurig for cocktails. There's a lot of different things out there that are new trends that none of the local places are taking advantage of. You have maybe one national retailer that's making and selling those. You guys might be able to get into doing things like that. A lot of people are using those devices at home. They used to be pretty expensive. Now I've seen them as little as $99. You can also create synergies. I know that they talked about this in some of the sessions that I went to. If you end up with beer that you normally would dump, it's not quite the quality you want to put out there, you might be able to distill it. So you're not having product losses. And then in the other end of it, if you have barrels that you have produced spirits in, you can use the bourbon barrels or sherry barrels, and you can use it to finish some of your beers. Add just a few new flavor varieties and profiles to what you guys are already doing. So there might be some synergies there that you can take advantage of. Now, some operational issues. There are a few things to be aware of and think about if you're going to add a distillery, some issues that are slightly different than what you deal with as a brewery. So one of them is oak barrel acquisition and disposal. You guys don't have to do much of that. You may do some barrel aged stuff, but obviously for spirits, it's a lot. And this is one of the issues that a lot of people focus on, trying to find that supplier that's going to be able to get them the number of barrels they need and at a price that they can afford. So that would be something you want to look into. Same as when you guys started out trying to find the right hop suppliers and malt suppliers. But here, the grain is easy to come by. However, the barrels are going to be hard to come by. Understand you have grain acquisition and spent grain disposal. Some of that will be similar to what you guys already do, but some of it may be different. A lot of people will take spent grain and give it to farmers, but if it's got distilled stuff in it, maybe the farmers can't or won't take it with it. So you may need to look into what you're going to do with some of those. You're not going to take your spent grain and make, beer bread with it. So you'll need to figure out a little bit of a different way to handle some of those things. There are some record keeping differences. There's a little bit more to keep, and I think a lot of that is because alcohol is in aging process for a longer time. So you're reporting every month, you're starting, you're ending, what's been bottled, things like that. So the record keeping is a little bit more, but honestly, the software that's out there is tremendous. You can get in there, it tells you exactly what to keep track of. It's almost like a checklist. Fill in this, fill in that, and most of them auto-report and do the reports and e-send them right to the TTB with it. So it is true that the record keeping is different. However, most of us are using software anyways. It's pretty easy that's out there. Label and formula approval process. That's going to be a little bit different for you. And the reason is you're probably making beer by a traditional process, and you very rarely need to do what's called a formula approval. Those are only needed when you're making something that is not according to the original way of making it hundreds of years ago. But with spirits, you may be doing things that are newer types of spirits, and in that case, you do need to do the formula approval with it. So they're not difficult. You'll get a sample, you'll see one of it, and you'll be able to do them anytime you need it, but it will be a step that may be new to you because you can't do the label approval until you do the formula approval before it. And a lot of people ask, what is the formula approval about? In my general opinion, it's for them to tell you what you're going to call it on your label. because the TTB has classifications. So you put in what you're making and what ingredients, and then you tell them what you think you might want to call it. They're going to come back and tell you, no, on the label you're going to call it this. So whether it's bourbon flavored, bourbon like, something like that. But if it's not made the very traditional way, they're going to tell you exactly how you need to label it with it. And part of that they consider consumer protection, just that it's labeled accurately. So that is, to me, the biggest practical aspect of the formula approval process. The other thing they're going to look at is just to make sure that the ingredients that you're putting in are food grade ingredients. They're things that can go in, FDA approves them with that, so you'll list, things you can't put in certain dyes or colors or things. But I think generally you guys are probably aware of that. There's a list of what you can put in as food grade and not. And I think that's the other thing that they're checking on for the most part. All right, costs and margins different a lot. So when you do your budgeting for a brewery, your budgeting for distilling operations will be very different. So that's something that you want to explore a little bit and maybe get some professional assistance at the beginning, or find somebody that does some distilling that you can understand a little bit how the cash flow works and stuff like that. So it does have higher margins, but it's a little bit different in terms of your forecasting. And a lot of that is because with your beer, it's in and out in a few months. With distilled spirits, it could be years before it's in and out, so it's very different. The other thing to understand is distribution channels and laws are very different. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So one question I get asked a lot, can I make distilled spirits in the same place that I make beer? Yes, both the TTB and the New York allow you to do that. They can be in the same facility. However, the preference is strongly that they be in a separate room. So essentially, they want you to really have a floor to ceiling barrier between distilling operations and brewing operations. On very small places, there is a way to get a variance. However, because people come and say, well, I know they did it at this farm, they did both. So you can get variances to do it. But I will tell you, for other practical reasons, you probably do want to have it separated out. One of the practical reasons has to do with building code. The building code that applies to stills and operations like that, it is much stricter and much tougher. And so you don't want to have to build your whole facility to that higher standard. You only want that little teeny room where the one piece of equipment that's in there has it, because you have space requirements around it. I know that you guys, do some milling, but a lot of times with distilleries, they have obviously a lot more alcohol that is in the air. It's a lot more volatile and flammable. Also, the grain that they're doing, there's a lot more fire hazard that comes with the process of the grain and mashing it down. So the fire code will have up to a certain amount. You have lower standards, but once you get over, say 120 barrels, it's a whole different level of standard that is tens of thousands of dollars and fire suppression systems. So that's another very practical reason to make it a very small space. Then you qualify under what they call F1, and it will be a much smaller, set of standards that you need to apply to. So one of the questions that you guys were asking was shared equipment. Yes, you absolutely can have shared equipment. You're not going to be sharing the still itself, but the other equipment you can absolutely share. Part of how you would do that is, you've heard of the alternating proprietor. And so that is where you have another business, like another brewer coming in and sharing your equipment. Well, you can do the same thing, but this one they call an alternating premise. Your equipment is shared with yourself. So some days the equipment is being used under the distillery license, and some days it's being used under the brewery license. That is perfectly fine. It's part of the application. All you do is you have in your diagram and you show, this is the equipment that is shared, and then you just explain in it, these are the things that are going to be shared and what they're going to be used for. So absolutely can be done. It's just a few sentences and a few marks on your drawing to indicate that to them. The big thing that they're looking for is to make sure that the product, especially tax paid and aging, is separated. When they come in, they want to be able to know that's beer, that's spirits. you need at least 6 feet between them. They would prefer that you had a physical barrier. However, as long as they're 6 feet apart, they're generally okay. They will take tape or chalk on the floor, a lot of times to say this is, where we're storing the stuff for, distilled products, and this is where we're storing beer. So again, some of this goes into the variances and explaining how you're going to keep them separate so the government gets all the taxes it is supposed to get with it. Now, when we have shared equipment, there is an issue that I should bring up. With the brewery, they don't care as much about your tanks being locked. In the distillery, your tanks have to be locked. So you may need to add a locking tank if you're going to use it for both purposes. With it. That is something that they ask me about almost every single time. We have to put in a sworn statement, yes, the tanks are locked. With beer, they're apparently okay with people stealing it, but with distilled spirits, and it's always interesting because nobody can go into the production area anyways. So you can't get in unless you're an employee, but nonetheless, they still are requiring the tanks to be locked, or somehow you have to convince them they have security not only on the building and the room, but on the tanks themselves. All right, so the question is, do you have to have it at the same location? Absolutely not. You can have 2 of them. You can have a distillery license at another location if you want. You could also have an alternating proprietor with somebody who already has a full distillery setup. So you're certainly allowed to do both. So you can have it at the same facility. You're not required to. You're allowed to have both licenses, at the same location or at other locations. And one of the big issues we have is, where am I going to store my product? So at the beginning, you don't have a lot, but obviously space is worth a lot, especially at a brewery. You're going to want to maximize a lot of your space for either storage or your beer that is for distribution, or for your tap room where you're making your margins on consumers. So you don't want to be wasting it with, high-priced space that you're using just to store aging barrels for years on end. So most of my people, after they get going for a while, they get a very simple warehouse license, and they just store it offsite at a warehouse. A warehouse license is $800 or $900, and it's like for 3 years. So that is certainly one solution. I have a lot of people that distilleries, farm distilleries, are allowed 1 branch office. Rather than pay the $900 or so for that, we just make one of the branch offices a warehouse, because you can do anything at the branch office you could do at the original, so storage works. Most of the time people want to use the branch office to have a second tasting room, but you certainly could use it for warehousing purposes as well without any extra cost with it. So am I limited to using New York ingredients? No, very similar to the way you guys have both farm brewery and microbrewery. We have farm distillery and micro distillery. We also have a rectifier and a micro rectifier. There is not a such thing as a farm rectifier with it. It is possible, just like you guys can have the combination of the farm license and the micro license, you can do the same thing here. Why do I bring this up? Because a lot of people, when they get started, want to buy some spirits from somebody else to get started. Especially depending on what it is you're looking to make. But if you're making, white liquor, that's quick. It's in and out of your system pretty much as fast as beer. However, things that are aged, the problem is you have a lot of sunk money because you can't sell certain things until they've aged at least 3 years. So one of the ways that people get a product out there at the beginning is they buy some bulk stuff, they do some finishing or changing, blending, whatever it is they're going to do, and then they have a product that they can put out on the market until they're able to have the stuff that they made hit the market. The problem is most people are not buying their bulk spirits made here in New York. A lot of the bulk spirit makers are in other states. So the micro license allows for them to do that. I also honestly have a lot of people where small places are going out of business. They get an opportunity to buy all the inventory. If it comes from out of state, you couldn't buy it and use it. But if you have the micro distillery license with it, you can take advantage of those opportunities. And I do get those texts all the time. Hey, I met somebody, they got all this they want to sell. Am I allowed to do that? Absolutely. You gotta file a TIB, a transfer and bond, but it's a pretty simple thing, and it's something that a lot of small distilleries are using to get really good margins. Somebody's going out of business, you're gonna get bulk stuff at a good price. Yes.
Sorry, I'm a little late, but there is also Clear Source in Medina that is using a majority New York State corn to make beverage grade GNS.
I was gonna say, absolutely. When I started, that was the first thing I did, was talk about a couple of the people that were here, the vendors that I saw that were supporting this. Yes.
So you make 75,000 gallons max order, and so what?
We're going to talk about that in a minute. It's going to be 50 gallons, not 50 barrels. So with beer, it's 50 barrels. So with the distillery, it's 50 gallons. That's a pretty small batch. So that's one of the things, I said this yesterday in one of the sessions. It is true that you have to, in order to have a license as a manufacturer, you need to manufacture something. Otherwise, it's, what they call non-bona fide. If all you're doing is buying it and reselling it, you're a distributor. You're not a manufacturer. So to manufacture, you need to make some product. So you need to make your minimum 50 gallons, and if you have 2 licenses, 50 gallons under each one. But it doesn't say that the 50 gallons you make are the stuff that you're selling. So you can get all the stuff you plan to sell done under contract manufacturing as long as you are making some yourself. So I usually tell people, use it as your pilot project. Use it to make some, things you want to test some things, see what it is. And if you really have no use for it, you're going to have a heck of a Christmas party, with it. Because you need to make it, you need to report it on all of your reports, and you need to pay excise tax on it. But it does not need to be the product that you sell, because as long as you make your 50 gallons, you're allowed to contract the rest of it.
So if say I made like 50 gallons and put it into a barrel, like the tax isn't paid on that yet, or
Yep.
is that? It is.
Essentially, when it's the same as how you guys do it with beer. Essentially, when it's ready, it's packaged to be sold, that's when you're supposed to pay tax. Honestly, most people don't pay tax until you pull it out of the bonded area, just to control it, so that you're basically, don't have a ton of money out in taxes with it. But it's the same. As long as it is still in aging or still in your, you keep it untax paid, that's okay. When you pull it out, so when you bottle it, essentially, is when you're going to do it. Now, one of the things I will mention is there is a restriction on the sizes of what you're allowed to make. So you can do only standard sizes of bottles. The only reason I mention this is a lot of people have asked or thought about the idea of making big batch cocktails, like 5 gallons, and they may not be permitted under the sizing restrictions. With spirits, they have very specific sizes you're allowed to sell. So as long as you can fit within one of those, you're okay. But bulk stuff really is not that easy on these small licenses. They're assuming that you're making it at the consumer level, with 750 milliliter, a liter, liter and a half, something like that. So there are, other sizes. Sometimes you can get variances for that, but it's not very easy to get a variance on size. Ingredients. 75% is what they're looking for in terms of spirits. So it's not too much different than you see under the farm licenses that you have for wine or for beer. And everyone always asks me, I'm using New York water. No, New York, the water is not counted in that. I must answer that question twice a week. So use New York State ingredients, but because you have 25%, you can bring in the flavors that we don't have here. The example, you have somebody wants to make something out of dragon fruit, or they want botanicals made places, things we don't grow here in New York. That's fine, you can use those ingredients, but really what they're focused on, again, this is a farm license. They want your grain or your fruit, whatever it is that you're using to make the alcohol, that's what they're really looking to have made out of New York ingredients. Your flavorings don't count very much.
Does the oak barrels, would that fall into that
Nope.
category as well?
No, unfortunately. That's a good one. I haven't been asked that one. I'm always amazed at how creative people are with these. All right, so I think I already answered this, but yes, you can contract manufacture all that you would like as long as you do make your minimum 50 gallons. And you can purchase it in one of two ways. So some people are buying it in bulk, they're getting a tank, and then they're bottling it themselves. And some people are buying it, you know, already canned and it's already tax paid and they're buying it that way. Either way is fine. Obviously, if you're buying it in bond, you need to do the tip. And some people do that partly for cost. You know, they want to bottle, you know, save some of the cost and do it themselves. Sometimes they're doing it just because they want to be able to put their stuff on the label. You know, it's bottled here with it. So either way is perfectly fine under licensing. All right, here's a question that I got asked just when you guys were walking in. So there are different types of processing of distilled spirits. So there's a distiller, a rectifier, and a bottler. So let's talk about what each one is so you can figure out which license you might need. So a distiller, you're actually producing the fermented product yourself. You have grain or wort and you're actually distilling it. A rectifier, you're buying bulk distilled spirits from somebody else and then doing something with it. You are going to either redistill it, you're going to cut it, blend it, mix it, infuse it, but basically you're buying the neutral grain spirit from somebody else and doing something with it. That's rectifying for the most part with it. So the difference is with a rectifier is you are doing something to change the character of the alcohol. It's not just moonshine, it's now something different. And I have an example on a slide that we'll get to. So a bottler is basically where you're taking what you have, you're buying it in bulk and just bottling it under your name. You know, so it's sort of white label. With it, and there are, you know, a lot of places that's all they do. They want to bottle under their brand. They don't really want to make anything. That's okay, but you're going to be getting a bottling license, you know, as opposed to a full distilling license. And that's more at the federal level, to be honest. We don't really have a separate license in the state that covers that.
What's the cost difference between each one of those?
I don't think there is one. I mean, I'll go back and look. I have a slide that's there, but even if there is, you're talking like $100.
Okay.
Basically, the licenses are relatively the same with it in terms of cost. All right, so to better explain this rectification, I found some examples. So one example is limoncello. I have a lot of Italian restaurants that, you know, want to have their own limoncello made. And so this is rectification because they're taking the neutral spirits, they're adding sugar and citrus. So they're changing it. It's not neutral spirits. They're adding something else to change the character of it. So that makes it something that is rectification. And I'll go through and I'll explain how that's a little bit different than RTD drinks, which are distilling. So redistilling and purification of bulk products, a lot of people buy something that's a fairly low grade and they just want to distill it further to get it a higher grade vodka. That's fine, that falls under rectification. If you want to buy something and say you want to finish it your own way, you want to age it, do something to it, a lot of people are just finishing it by putting it for a few months in a barrel, you know, with it. You know, I know that when people go to the store, they see barrel aged and all of a sudden it's $5 or $10 more a bottle, you know, with it. So certainly buying it already made by somebody, putting it in something to finish it, that'll fall under rectification. Adding wood chips, again, because you're changing inherently the character of the flavor of it. It's not only flavor, it's the character of the chemicals themselves. So adding wood chips is something that they consider rectification. Rebarreling and re-aging. You know, a lot of people buy it, something, they may buy a bunch of barrels, but then they want to put it in new barrels and age it for longer periods. That's rectification. And with redistillation, it can include adding botanicals to it. So you could buy a neutral grain spirit, and when you redistill it, add your botanicals. Examples might be gin, aquavit, anise, things like that with it. So yes.
Does being able to rectify it fall under the umbrella of just the distiller's license?
Absolutely, and we'll chat a little. So if you have a license as a distillery, you're allowed to do everything. You distill, you can rectify, you can be what they call a warehouseman. In other words, you can store it, you can process it, you can do everything as a distiller. If you're not actually making it from wort, then you have to be a rectifier. So that's really the difference. And I do have a lot in New York where they started out, whoever did their license form did not know the difference, and they applied as one, and then they had to come to me because the state told them they had the wrong license for what they were doing with it. So, and it's fairly easy, honestly, to switch between them. It's not like you have to reapply all over. There's what they call a change application. It's like one page. I was this, I now want to be this. If there's a difference in the fee, here's the check. You know, so if you have the wrong license, it's easy to change it if you need to. All right, so what license do I need to produce canned cocktails? So this is not rectification, because you're not just taking the spirit and changing the character of it, you're mixing it with other things. That becomes distilling. You know, so if you're adding it to fruit juice or seltzer or whatever it is, you're blending it, not just flavoring it. You know, like limoncello, I'm flavoring it. An RTD, I'm mixing it with something else. So that requires the full distiller's license. That confuses people because you're both using a neutral grain spirit as a starting point, so sometimes it's not easy. I usually tell people, if you're not sure what you're gonna make, go for the full distilling license with it. Then you don't have any problem, you know, in the next 10 or 20 years, you can make whatever it is that you plan on making. You know, a lot of times you don't know what's gonna be popular until you start selling it and you see what the demand is. All right, so New York State, these are the types. So on the federal level, you're a distillery or a distillery. There's no option. There's only one license type. You know, it's called a distilled spirits plant that's in there. And, you know, within it, you can pick the different things if you're only processing, only bottling, only warehousing, or doing all of it. You know, you select those at the TTB level, and if you want to add one, because you were only doing certain things and later you expand your operation and you're doing others, very simple. You go into your TTB application, little button there that says make amendment. You open up the application and you click the button for the new one you want to add. That's it. And then a couple weeks later, somebody will say, okay, now you can start doing the other thing. So adding things, getting the licenses in the first place, pretty difficult. Changing them once you have them, not a difficult process at all. All right, so within New York State, you have a couple different kinds of licenses. So traditional distillers are going to be your Class A. Your micro distillery, you hear a lot of people talk about A1 and B1. This is what they mean that are there. So if you're a farm distiller, it's a Class D. If you're a micro distiller, it's an A1 with it. And a rectifier, they have those. A micro rectifier falls. A lot of people have a B1 license because they're not actually distilling. They're mostly buying and rectifying with it. But you can see the fees on there. Full distillery license is almost $51,000 for the fee on that. The state, you know, for the farm level of license, you can see that their fees are down, you know, $1,000 to $2,000. So the state has made it very easy for you guys to get into the business of doing this. They're really trying to promote it and make it an affordable thing for you to do. So the micro distiller license, somebody had asked the difference in price. It's more than $100, I thought. It's $14.50 if you want the micro distillery, but if you do the farm distillery, it's $937. You know, obviously, they're always going to do things that if you're using New York State products, you're going to get a little bit better pricing on it. But it seems to be it's a little bit higher to be a rectifier. That fee is $1,700 as opposed to $1,400, but it's not a tremendous difference between them. All right. Which license did I get? I've heard all these different things, and so part of it, we have a conversation at the beginning. What are you looking to do? And so there might be 3 things that help guide us on what license to get. So your intended customer, that may be an issue, because if you want to sell at both wholesale and retail, then you're going to probably want to be a farm distillery. You know, another thing is if you think you're going to do some DTC sales to other states, there are some other states that do allow you to ship to them, but some of them, they're only allowing DTC if you're a farm manufacturer. So you just have to look, where are you looking to sell? You know, and that may guide you on what you're doing. Your intended production process might control which license you want. If you want to be RTD, you can't be a rectifier. Are you going to be purchasing bulk spirits as a basis to make other things? Maybe it's rectifying, but with it. So a lot of it is how you plan on making it and or who it is you're going to sell it. The other thing that's going to help us decide which is the best license is what's your intended method of operation. And so a lot of people aren't aware of these distinctions. So a farm distillery, you can have a tap room. You cannot have one if you're a micro distillery. The other thing is a lot of people want to sell things in their retail area other than the distilled spirits that they make. So if you are a micro rectifier or a micro distillery, you can sell anything that you produce in any other New York labeled spirit. That's it. You cannot sell clothing, t-shirts, promotional items, anything else, mixers, glassware. You need to be a farm distillery to sell those additional products. So a lot of, that's what people ask, why would I get 2 licenses? A lot of times this is the reason that we have 2 licenses, because they want to be able to sell other things at the tap room, or they want to be able to sell in different channels than they would be able to sell otherwise. So again, we've mentioned that yes, you can get your multiple licenses simultaneously. And you not only can you have both a micro distillery and a farm distillery. You know how each one you can only have 1 location and 1 branch office? You are not prevented from having 5 farm distillery licenses. So you can have multiples. There's no problem with that. You just pay a license fee for each one. Did you have a question?
Yeah, if you have a on-premise liquor license, you wouldn't have to worry about that, getting a farm distillery so that you can sell it in your tap room, if your tap room already has a retail license.
This is true. However, you may have some issue on how you're going to book it, because you need to sell it through a distributor perhaps. You can actually self-distribute, but you're selling it at wholesale. With it, it's not like you're doing it with your own product, because you're not allowed to sell that under that license. You need to wholesale sell it to the retail license that's with it. So yes, you can do it, but there's a little bookkeeping that has to go with that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no.
It's a little bit like the same with people that have micro and the farm brewery licenses. I know that not everybody follows the technicalities, but sometimes they have both licenses at the original production site, and then they have 4 or 5 tap rooms. You're not always allowed to take the non-New York stuff that you're produced and have it at the branch offices. People do it and get away with it, but technically you're not supposed to do that. All right, so can you sell through your existing sales channels? And maybe it depends on what your self channels are. So one of the things is obviously beer is sold mostly to grocery stores, and distilled spirits are going to be sold to liquor stores. And some of the distributors do not do both. So you need to figure out if whoever you're working with does that. A few other things to be aware. With beer, you don't have to do what they call a monthly price posting. With distilled spirits, you do. So every single month, you need to go in and say exactly what the price is, and that's the price for the month, and everyone's going to pay that price. You can't give one guy one deal and one guy a different deal. With beer, they don't require the price posting, so it can be slightly different. But with spirits, it's highly regulated. Every single person is going to pay the exact same price. Now you can have bulk discounts, so that somebody that buys 1 bottle pays one price, they buy 1 case, they pay one price, they buy 10 cases, they pay a cheaper price. But that pricing has to be offered to everybody. All right, the other thing that I mentioned to people is distribution protections between spirits and beer are very different. So we know that there are a lot of rules on beer franchise laws and dealing with the distributor, and a lot of protections, and that's why, they build all these things into the contract that you almost need to buy your way out once you've gotten with them. Technically, those rules in New York and on a federal level, they do not apply to distilled spirits. They apply only to beer. So if you were selling other products, your contract for distribution could look very different. With that said, I will tell you that every distribution contract I read, if they also do beer, they want to impose those same protections on you when you're selling distilled spirits with it. But you could try to argue and negotiate out of them because they really don't apply under state law. But the problem I find with distributors is it's more like a take it or leave it. You know, it's a negotiation. It's not that easy, but it is possible. And especially with newer, smaller distributors, you may have an easier time negotiating than you are with a national one. Can you distribute your own products? Absolutely. All New York manufacturing licenses come with the right to self-distribution. Can I distribute my products out of state? And the answer is New York really doesn't have any say on that. It's wherever you're selling it to, the laws of that state are the ones that count. So some states you can sell directly. They can put in a purchase order and you can ship it to them in that other state. Some states you have to work through their distributor. Some states, maybe you need a specific license to sell. There are licenses to make a sale just to a distributor with it. So you just have to look at the state you're going to and what the rules are and if you need any licenses or permits in order to do that. Can I sell my own products at the tap room? I mean, I think you guys know the answer is yes, but again, distilleries can sell any alcohol that it makes or any New York labeled, but the farm distillers are allowed to also sell any other New York labeled beverage. They're not limited to distilled spirits. So if you have a farm distillery license, you can sell beer, wine, mead, cider, anything, as long as it's New York labeled. Why does that matter? Because we have this on-premise license that some get to have a fuller bar. A lot of, farm distillers don't need to get anything else. They can have a pretty decent bar just selling New York things without having to deal with the extra restrictions of the retail license. And the biggest extra restriction is more food requirements and a bigger kitchen requirement. And a lot of people that have a tap room, they really don't want to be a restaurant. So they want to avoid all of that level of regulation. Must I serve food? So we know that when you do tastings only, they don't require a lot. But if you're going to be selling by the glass, somebody's going to come in and have a cocktail or, have a glass of something, you need to have some food. So if you don't have a full manufacturer's license, they say finger foods are okay. So it can be cheese, fruit, crackers, that kind of stuff, snack things. They're enough if you're just selling, New York spirits, the stuff that you make in your tasting room. But if you have a fuller license that you're going to sell any kind of spirits, the stuff that you make plus other things, then you have to have the minimum license that they would have to have for a tavern. And so you need at least 5 things on your menu, and that's going to include soups, sandwiches, salads. Those are the examples that they give you in the law. But essentially it has to be 5 things that are substantial. Do they, it can be pizza. I have places that buy 1 large pizza, resell it by the slice. That works. If you are selling nachos and salsa, that's not going to work. They're going to consider that a snack. Make it loaded nachos, it's now an entree. And so if I have a charcuterie board and it has meat and cheese, it's a snack. All of a sudden I put some nuts in a little thing of jelly or something, it's an entree. So some of it's playing with it, and I tell you, a lot of times I can, give a guess from experience, but also think about, you can look at it in a restaurant. Are you selling it under the entree or is it an appetizer? If it's an appetizer, not enough. So I tell everyone, if you're gonna do a burger is an a la carte thing. Put chips on the side, it's an entree. Put some carrot sticks on the side, it's an entree. Sometimes you wonder, why do they give these things like pickles on the side or pickled vegetables that nobody ever eats? Now you know why. Can I sell liquor on the internet? The answer is yes. Within New York, again, if you're selling out of state, it's the laws of the other state that control. And DTC, you may need a permit from that state for a few $100s to ship into that state directly to consumers. But within New York, you can now do shipping. 36 cases or 9 liters per New York resident, and it has to be for personal consumption. They can't be reselling it, so they can't be a liquor store buying it at home and then trying to sell it at their liquor store with it. And if you have a license, more than one license, you can include them all in the same box. That didn't actually used to be the case. You used to have separate shipments for wine and spirits, things like that. Now you can put them all in the same box as long as you have the licenses to do all of them. One of the things you need to know when you do internet orders is you need to make sure that your point of sale system has some affirmative representation. I'm over 21 and I'm not going to be reselling it. So a lot of people have that I'm over 21 thing, but they don't have the second one, I'm not going to be reselling it. So you need to somehow have your website people add that in. The other thing to be aware is when it's delivered, the ID needs to be checked. Now, does it need to be delivered to the exact person that placed the order? No, but the person who's receiving it does have to be 21. What I mean by that is if you take it to a business, like you send it to my office, it doesn't need to come to me. The front desk person, as long as they're over 21, can sign for it. Same as at my house. If my adult children or my husband answers the door, they can get it with it. All right, and the records on the sales, you need to keep them for 3 years. So you need to make sure that anybody you're using for delivery is keeping them for 3 years. Don't worry if you're using a common carrier like FedEx or UPS, they know these rules and they're keeping them. But if you're using some smaller service, just make sure that you have the records for that long. Can I contract a manufacturer for another manufacturer? The answer is yes. Here, but a couple things to know. So first off, if the other manufacturer is in New York, you both need to be licensed. So both of you need to have a distillery license for contract manufacturing. The reason I keep saying New York is because you can contract a manufacturer for people in other states and they don't need to be licensed. It's odd, with it, but I have a lot of people that are these brand owners that they get it made by somebody else, and I've checked, and apparently you within New York you do, but if you're selling it to somebody out of state, if that state allows it, they don't have to have a distillery license in order to purchase from you with it. So the other thing to know is those 75,000 gallon limits. So if you're contract manufacturing, the amount counts against both of your licenses. So it's important to know that, but on a practical matter, nobody gets even close to the 75,000 gallons. I mean, you need to be a huge operation to be making that amount. I have a lot of distilleries that none of them get above 10,000, and they're pretty large, operations with it. So know that that does exist, but in practical terms, unless you're a full scale, a thing, you're never even gonna get close to those limits, so it shouldn't be a problem for you. All right, documents that you're gonna need if you're going into add a DSP to your basic permit and your brewer's notice that you already have. So a few things to be aware, you do need a diagram detailing the premise, and you may need to update the diagram because the diagram they have is a brewery. If you're adding a distillery, you're going to update that diagram to show where the new equipment and all that is that's in there. And one of the things to be aware is that in a brewery, they really separate your retail space from your production space. But in distilling operations, they have this, the DSP is the bonded area or the production area, and then everything else they call general premise. So general premise will include your bathrooms, your storage closets, your break room, any area that is not directly production area, they call general premise. And you need to label it on the diagram as such. So a big part of me was just explaining to you that not only you needed this, but to introduce what that language is, because it's not a language you use as a brewer. The other thing that's important is you're probably going to need a variance if you're doing both of them. So it's not something you needed to put in when you did your first license. 1 or 2 variances at least will probably be required for you to have 2 operations in the same building with it. Now, not that I'm looking to give away all the trade secrets, but if you're really good at Google, you can find an example of what a variance letter looks like. TTB has some that are out there so that you can see and follow. They're fairly simple letters. You just put it on your letterhead and explain what it is you're doing and what you're looking for. And they have a very standard format at them, you just upload it. with it. So it's important to know you need one, but it's not like going to the local zoning office and getting a variance. This variance is just a letter, requesting what you're requesting and why you're requesting it. Alternating proprietorship. So again, you can do an alternating proprietorship, or you could have an alternating premise. And as we said, the alternating proprietorship would be if you were going to use somebody else's distillery and you were going to share their facility, you may be doing it as an alternating proprietorship. If you're using your own facility, but sometimes as a distillery and sometimes as a brewery, you're an alternating premise with it. So similar words, and hopefully, they make sense, but both of those require a variance in order to get permission for either of those. And to complicate it even more, you could do both at the same place, but hopefully you guys are not going to get into that level of complication with it. All right. So if you're applying for a distillery license, it is important to know that when you're filling out your applications, you need a list of every piece of equipment, what size it is, and for all stills and condensers, really the stills, but sometimes they ask on condensers, you actually need the number on it, the serial number. They keep track of those on all of the stills. Now, a lot of my farm distillers, they make their own distiller, no problem. You give it a number. 001. There's its number. As soon as your application is approved, you've now registered that still, the same as the manufacturer would have registered it. You're the manufacturer because you made your own still. So when it asks you for the number and you're like, but I made it, I don't have one, make up any number you want and put it in. That's all that you have to do on that. But it is important to realize that you do need to list your equipment. I think in brewing you don't need to be as specific as you do in distilling. And if you're going to be doing the shared equipment, you're going to need to say what each piece of equipment is used for. So if you have a tank you're using for 2 things, you're going to need to specify it's being used for 2 things with it. Making, blending spirits, also using it for beer, whichever. So all you're going to do is list the equipment and what you intend to do with each piece of equipment. And of course, they want to know the size or the volume that's in there. These others are not super important because very few people do them. But when you're doing the TTB things, they're very particular on how you're going to store your product, and they want to know, I'm going to store it in the left-hand corner, and it's going to be in cardboard boxes on wood pallets, or it's going to be in 40-gallon oak barrels. They're very specific on that.
One quick question on the alternating premise. So if I'm making beer at one point and then I want to, make the mash, and can I use that fermenter one day as mash and then the next day can be distilling?
Exactly, and that's exactly what the alternating premise is. It's where you say, this equipment is brewery only, this equipment is distillery only, this equipment is shared, is alternating. Sometimes I'm using it for distilling, sometimes I'm using it for that. And then you put a variance in to say, this equipment is going to be used for 2 purposes. That's it.
And
So-
you have to document all that down in the letter and everything else.
Same as you do in brewing. I mean, most of the places I go, they have a clipboard on the front, and you just detail, this day it was distilling. Essentially, in terms of TTB, they consider it, it's a 24-hour day. You're really only supposed to do one or the other during any 24-hour calendar day. So you just, keep track of which days you did which things in it, and a clipboard on the front is fine. Usually that software that you have is asking all those questions and recording it for you. All right. So we're almost at the end, but again, I just explained here a little bit what general premise is, and I gave an example of a description because when you put in things for brewery, it's not as specific. So I try to give you an example of what it is that they're looking for when you fill in the description of the premise when you're doing a DSP. And so the reason is twofold. Not only are the rules on what they're looking for different, but also they change the standard. So if you filed something a couple of years ago and you file something now, they want you to update all your descriptions to include new information that they didn't ask for when you filed it originally. So that's why I, put a couple examples in here. Where it asks for the tract of land or that, this is what they're looking for. They're looking for that page on the deed that has the meets and bounds description. They're not looking for, I'm doing this at 12 Main Street. It's in the basement. You know, they're looking for an actual meets and bounds. They're basically taking it from a satellite view, and that's how they keep track of it. So these were just to give you examples, so if you went in to fill it in, you know what they're asking for. Environmental. I don't think anybody here will ever have to do it, but some distilleries, they will ask more equipment or more information on environmental things if you're going to be discharging into navigable waters or you're near other things. But I think everyone here is so small, they're probably never going to ask it, but I mention it because it is a section of the application. Depending on what you click, it'll depend on what opens up for you to answer, you know, with it. So if this gets opened up, my guess is you answer something wrong, it shouldn't really come up on anything you guys are doing. All right, equipment, you know, we've talked about this, that you need to talk about all the equipment, capacity, the type, serial number, and intended use of each piece of equipment. And again, we talked about if you make your own, how you get a serial number for it. Certified locks. This information, whenever you're dealing with distilled spirits, security is a very big issue. So you have to certify to them that all locks will meet this minimum standard. And security measures. One of the things they're going to ask you on the application is, what are your security measures? You're kind of wondering, well, you just asked me the question before about the locks. Isn't that the answer? No, they're asking, what are you using? Typical examples: mechanical locks, alarms, video surveillance, control of the keys, who has access to it. You know, we keep that area locked, the employees are the only ones back there. Those are the examples of security measures. And you don't need anything super, just these words are enough. You know, whatever ones you have, you just list them.
Quick question, so if you do brewery floor tours, and now we've got a alternating premise situation, can you not offer tours unpaid?
You can, because you're with an employee.
Okay.
It's not the public. The public can't freely go back there. But they're with an employee, they could.
Okay.
With it, I would say, do not use those words in your application that you're going to do that. Everyone that sends it to me, I write all that out, because it'll create a whole list of issues that we don't necessarily want to go into. But one of the things, people wonder, why is this a big deal? You have to realize a distillery is a dangerous place to work. You have high pressure valves, there's a lot of fire. It's an OSHA violation for the public to be back there. I don't think people on your tours are wearing the safety equipment, your employees are. There's the reason, so it's not.
They always are.
Yeah, so a lot of people, you know, it is true that the regulations, there's a lot of them, but sometimes if you understand why, it makes sense. Because, you know, a brewery, you know, and a winery, you don't have as much high pressure stuff. I'm not saying there isn't something, but a distillery, almost everything is under high pressure. You know, so they just, you know, pop, things happen. You know, it's a very different atmosphere. The other thing is you have more volatile things in the air between dust and alcohol. So, you know, people, they're gonna sit there with their lighter, flick something, you know, static electricity. And you'd be surprised the things in a distillery that will cause a problem. So they don't want the public back there because they're not trained and they're not following safety protocols with it. So those are most of the things that I had today. So what questions can I answer for people?
I think you mentioned with the fire code, there was like production level above which you would need to.
Yes, and I talked to me about that after. There is a lot of information on this. So what happened was there is a national fire code where they've been trying. The problem was distillery was never in the fire code. So every single town we went to had a whole different set of standards. So there's been a movement to make it slightly more standard. There is a national code with some certain things, but then of course New York is going to adopt its own version. But there are different categories. I have some of those in some seminars that I give that I can send you with it, but to realize they are changing because New York is catching up. You know, its laws just didn't anticipate this. You know, and it's the same thing. We have the same issue with cannabis. The laws didn't anticipate all this, so now we got to retroactively go back and make changes. But there are different codes. But one of the big things that we do with a distillery, you divide your space into many little things. So when you do storage, you never have more than 120 barrels in any space. You have a wall, 120 here. You have a wall, 120 here. then you apply under the much, much lower standards. We make sure that there's a fire wall between your retail space and your storage space and production. That way, only that little space needs to comply with the rules and that little thing. And again, the fire hazard, as long as it's below a certain number of square feet or a certain number of gallons in there, the code is pretty low. You know, it's in there. It's once you get above that number, all of a sudden, you're a full scale industrial chemical plant. You don't want to go there. So a lot of people wonder, why when I go to a distillery are there 6,000 little teeny rooms? That's why. Why are brick houses and that not near the production? Why do they spend all the money transporting the liquid down the road to some facility that does nothing but store it? Fire hazards. You know, keep it off the site, so it's an insurance issue and a building code issue. You know, otherwise, obviously, transporting liquid, very expensive. You know, but if you look at any national distillery, you know, their storage is not where they're making it. It's off-site. All right, so what else can I answer for you guys? And who's gonna go ahead and do this? These are fun. I have a couple people here that are thinking Genesee Brewery, maybe Swiftwater will talk him into doing it. I don't know, these are fun. I like doing things that are fun and new, but also helping you guys find new revenue streams. It is tough to be a business owner in New York. I know I had my own business. You know, I did merge a couple years ago with Evans Fox, but I've been a business owner for a couple decades. I know how hard it is to do business in New York. So anything that I can do to take all the assets that you already have, you've got labor, you've got a brand, you've got all this equipment. If you just knew that you could earn money doing a couple more things with a couple tweaks, you know, it's a blessing. The problem is you just don't know. So now you're here, now you know some things that you can do. It's not as hard as you thought. You know, an investment of a few $1,000s and you can start producing something else. And if your beer revenues are down a little bit, replace them with spirit revenues. You know, the market may change and it may be ready to drink cocktails and all that are not super popular 5 years from now. But same as you guys who made it through COVID and everything else, just be adaptable. You know, have the licenses to do all the different things that you can do. But one of the other things that is great about a distillery license, New York does not allow infused things or batch things to be made by bars or restaurants. We all know they do it. I go to every bar and they've got infused fruit, you know, sitting up, totally legal. It has to be in the original bottle and served right to the consumer. There's only one exception, and that is this continuously mixing device. So nothing that you infuse, not pre-made sangria, none of that stuff is legal in New York. I know that it's out there, but I tell all of my restaurants, you know, find a local distillery, and I usually match them up with somebody. Let them make it for you. You know, then it's legal when you have it, you know, with it. So sometimes you can, you know, just get good relationships with your local retailers by doing a small little project for them. Italian restaurant that wants a limoncello, you know, whatever it is. It can be a great way just to foster more either community or more people liking your product, knowing about it. You know, and sometimes I wish you could throw everything in a small community. So restaurants always want to have their own stuff. You can make their own, you know, just like you could do a house beer, you know, white label it, you know, or contract, you know, all of that, and then do the same thing with distilled spirits. And a lot of them want to get into making something fun and unique and different, but they can't legally do it. But they can come to you, you can make it, sell it to them. So another revenue opportunity. All right, everyone. If anyone wants these slides, just come up, give me your email, or my information is there. You can email, I will send them over to you. If you have questions after today, certainly give a call. And I think there's at least one other attorney. I know there's not a lot of us that do these areas, but there are 3 or 4 attorneys that are here besides me. Some do licensing, some do other things. But I would say that of the firms that are here, they're all really good firms. There are people that I spend my life cleaning up messes that they make. Everybody that is here is an excellent legal resource. You know, again, I hope you come to me, but everybody that is here is a great attorney with it. And I say that because really, there are some very bad people out there attempting to do licenses. They're accountants, or they used to be bartenders, or they owned a business. And since they did their own liquor license, they thought they could do other people's. Some of my clients have paid tens of thousands of dollars in fines because they answered the questions wrong. You know, so I just say, if your livelihood is based on this, you might wanna have some guidance. You know, and some of us, even if we don't do the whole thing, I'll give it a looky-see before you file, even if you're not paying me to do the whole thing. Don't get yourself in trouble. All right, you guys, have an awesome day.